Welcome back to DotLife. We are having a great conversation today about White Stadium, which is obviously on the border of several neighborhoods, but in Franklin Park, but Dorchester is one of the impacted neighborhoods. I'm excited to introduce Mike Omenazu, who is the Director of Community Engagement with Legacy Football Club. Hey, Mike.
Hi, hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. Really excited to chat with you today. You are kind of a Dorchester guy, but you don't really claim Dorchester.
I proudly claim Dorchester, especially as is the location of my address on my taxes.
Okay.
And also proudly claim Roxbury, as that's where I go to the Y, and that is my neighborhood branch at the library. So, in this debate over whether you consider Grove Hall, Roxbury, or Dorchester, I would say Roxbury more so for me.
So you're on the line.
Exactly.
We'll take half of you.
Yeah.
So tell me what you do as Director of Community Engagement at Legacy Football Club. What does that role entail?
Yeah, that role entails me getting to manifest my dreams and previous wishes as a community resident who participated in community meetings and voiced his opinion into now a more formal capacity on behalf of the team, getting to advocate for the community by delivering on specific commitments that we made as concessions that came out of this 2-year process of working to hear from residents around White Stadium. So we heard a pretty passionate plea for protecting access to the park and actually increasing it, as well as the number of different investments and considerations on how that would impact the communities around it, as I'm a neighbor. And my job now is to make that a reality and to actually bring to life what we said and promised to the community.
There was a lot of voices that you guys heard during that process.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a lot of work for you. Did you work for the team when this initial project came into fruition, or did you join later on?
So I actually joined after participating both initially as a community resident.
Okay.
Prior to joining in a formal capacity with the team about a year or so ago. Okay. And obviously this process has been going on for 2 years, specifically with the Legacy Football Club. And then as we know, the broader historical context, 40 plus years. So, you know, I came in halfway in between that last 2 years of the team and the city working in partnership to amplify the voices of community residents all across the city, and then specifically those in the neighborhoods around White Stadium, and transition from literally just signing up for those community meetings and showing up on a Zoom to now translating that into a formal capacity and role on behalf of the team.
I want to take a step back actually and talk about how this project started. When I was doing some reading, it sounded like the football club identified White Stadium as where they wanted to be and came to the city with that idea. It wasn't really a bidding process or a lot of different sites in consideration. What was it about White Stadium that drew Legacy to that location, and what did that process look like?
Yeah, I think you correctly noted the intentional investment in White Stadium for a number of reasons, which I'm happy to get into, as well as I will actually say deep consideration of a number of different alternatives, especially recognizing that historical context, right? Both of this conversation around the 40 years of renovating White Stadium, but also the iterations of the National Women's Soccer League and the team in Boston. Mm-hmm. So the iterations that have played in other venues before, like Nickerson Field or Harvard Stadium, and taking that all in consideration, as well as the different criteria of where the league stands now in this explosive moment of interest, and taking all of those different factors, broadcasting, all of those things, align very well with White Stadium and the intentional investment into the city and the impact that we could have both in those 20 game days as well as the entire 365 for the entirety of the year, as we aim to revitalize not just White Stadium, but how fans and communities think about the impact of sports teams.
Yeah. So you said there were some other stadiums under consideration, but White Stadium in particular, just the location, the proximity to the city, the fact that it was in a neighborhood that you thought would draw interest. Is that what other considerations came into White Stadium?
Yeah, namely its role as a treasured asset within the community, as an emerald and crown jewel and the emerald necklace. Like, that was really critical, as we know a number of community members have wanted White Stadium to be renovated for years. It's a conversation that has preceded the team. Definitely. And in multiple administrations and multiple neighbors who've come in and out have wanted to see White Stadium renovated. So as you correctly mentioned, so many different factors. It really distinguished it as such a great alignment with our goal, again, of thinking about our relationship with the city and with communities, right? We wanted to think about, yes, we have the 20 game days, and also what can community residents do with White Stadium for the rest of the year and all 365 days, and particularly this intentional investment around Boston Public School students
Yeah.
and Boston Public School athletes, and their ability to share this global stage and this modern state-of-the-art facility with the pro sports team and their fellow community members and neighbors.
Is high school engagement part of the Legacy Football Club's mission?
Absolutely. It's both personal, as I live pretty close to Boston Latin Academy, and again, in pretty close proximity to walking proximity to White Stadium, as well as have family friends who actively play athletics for Boston Public Schools, BLA in particular, football, basketball, baseball, a number of different sports. So it's personal, and seeing them be able to access the resources, they've clamored for this, and I've heard from a number of coaches who talked about the impact that will have in their sense of self and their sense of achievement and what they can actually do, as well as a number of the different stories from so many of the previous athletes and generations before. And one of my favorite aspects of the role involves people coming up to me and saying how they set a record in track at White Stadium back in the day, or so many different connections, and now being able to add to this next generation and this future for those students is a huge part of the mission of the legacy that's personal, as well as a commitment of the entirety of the team.
Yeah, that's great. Talk about some of the other benefits. So obviously, having this track and these facilities available to the high school students is huge. What other things are coming into the community and into the stadium itself and into the park as part of this project?
Yeah, in addition to a number of those benefits you mentioned for the athletes, including the ability to triple the amount of programming that can take place with the improvements to the infrastructure and the resources like public bathrooms and water fountains for students, as well as a number of different facilities. And there are additional benefits for community members as who they'll be able to access the park. We're going to be able to triple the amount of hours that those stadium will be available and accessible to community members. They made that very clear. Public access is really critical and is important, and the renovation will be able to do that. As well as tremendous economic benefit, right? We've intentionally committed to ensuring that the community participates in the building of this renovation, as well as the operation of it, and to ensure that those dollars are flowing within the community, recognizing that transformative impact that can have for lifelong contract opportunities for businesses that will have residents in a home in White Stadium. And then obviously we know the economic impact that will have for the homeowners, renters, and all the folks in that area.
So does that mean that Legacy is not contracting with like an Aramark or a national chain to bring in like the concessions and things, or what do you mean when you say that the operations will be run by local folks?
Yeah, exactly. So we made a pretty ambitious commitment to awarding 50% of our contracts to local businesses, as well as minority and women business-owned enterprises.
Okay.
And a specific focus, again, on making sure that those are flowing back into the households in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Jamaica Plain, the neighborhoods that surround it, as well as the entire city. And have intentionally worked to hit that ambitious goal in a number of different ways. So we're working with the city, and we have established a supplier diversity advisory group that it gives us they're experts in the field who have accomplished similar initiatives and worked on similar projects at this scale, who help us to identify who are different businesses within the community that could fulfill a lot of those different needs, whether that's on the operational side or the construction side. We're thinking now with the impact for the totality of the project.
I know that, obviously those are great, but there are obviously still a lot of detractors who are not fans of this project, who are very vocal. There's still lawsuits, or at least lawsuits in the conversation. Whether or not they're still happening, I'm not entirely sure. So can you address some of those concerns? Obviously, parking, traffic are two big ones. I'll let you start there, and then I've got a few others.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest parts of this role has been how we've been able to tangibly respond to concerns and convert them into concessions, into commitments. And specific as relates to parking into transportation, we actually, for transparency purposes, released recently a public draft of a transportation plan with different ideas of how we aim to mitigate traffic and specific investments that we'll make, particularly activating Southwest Corridor, the biking around the area, as well as looking into different options for ride shares, and that making sure that those are also accessible in the same way that the stadium will be ADA accessible. We're looking to a number of different multimodal options to be able to address some of these concerns around parking and be able to deliver confidently that folks will be able to respond to the interest that we anticipate coming on game day, and be able to do so through a diversity of ways, whether that's walking to the stadium, whether that's through the ride share, whether that's through shuttles, and working with the different T stops that they'll be located in a place that we're working directly on hearing and from community residents and have received hundreds of responses to that draft plan and are incorporating that specifically into what we will incorporate. And I think what that speaks to the larger impact of where we aim to impact beyond game days, because there's been a clamoring for all the events already happen at Franklin Park, right? And the ability to provide resources to create a coordinated and comprehensive plan to addressing those and to play a role in that is like one of the areas where I'm most interested and eager into participating.
So things like the shuttles and ride sharing and things, those will be in place all the time, not just during games?
So there will be specific plans for game day as well as thinking holistically for the whole year. Okay. And that draft transportation plan actually breaks it down into specific sections. So it's like, what does it look like on game day? What does it look on game day if you're a resident within the specific walk shed and area of the park? What does it look like if you're arriving via some of the shuttles, where you're driving, ride share? And it is a pretty comprehensive doc that speaks to the diversity of different needs for transportation, whether that's game day as well as beyond, large-scale permit events that happen, other parts of the year, BPS activities. We're hoping to build one comprehensive document that reflects the differences and what operations will look like on those different days.
You mentioned the walk shed. Can you define exactly what the walk shed means?
Yeah, so the walk shed exists as an area to specifically outline certain protections for parking, as well as thinking about the impacts on folks who are trying to get to the game.
Okay.
So essentially, you could think of an outline of specific streets that are bound to the north, south, east, and west. And this is available in that draft transportation plan. Folks can see specifically which streets are included in that. Okay. But essentially outlines a portion of area around the stadium that's reflective of us thinking about the impact on those who are closest to White Stadium.
And that means in those streets, there's no parking without a permit? Or what is the walk shed?
So we're currently in, again, the process of outlining and finalizing those of like what that will actually look like. This is, as I mentioned earlier, why the community engagement process is so important. Yeah. My perspective has been expanded on the different opinions around permitted parking and whether folks are for or against it. You know, I thought this would be a no-brainer for some folks who want the protections of their neighborhoods, but then folks who have also talked about the unintended consequences potentially of what that could mean for folks who are not from their neighborhood but are intending to visit on specific days. Mm-hmm. So we're collecting all of that information from neighbors right now to be able to think about what would be the ideal setup for folks who are going to be literally in the closest proximity to White Stadium as outlined by that walk shed.
Okay, so that's still TBD.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I think some of the other concerns are around, you mentioned access to the park is important to people. There is a lot of outcry about, I don't know about a lot, but there is certainly a vocal outcry about this is a public park. It should not be restricted to private entities. Talk about the details of the private-public partnership that you've entered into and what restrictions are being put on public access.
Yeah, I would say actually I'll speak to the expansions to public access because that served as one of the key priorities for both the city as well as the team, hearing that specific passion that you mentioned for folks wanting to protect this public asset, this crown jewel. And we reflected that in a number of different specific protections and contractual agreements, specifically through a lease and a standard usage agreement. So ironclad documents that outline that one first ensures that this is not privatization because the city retains full ownership of the entirety of White Stadium. We exist as the tenant who is renting out space in White Stadium. So that public ownership remains to the city and to the people of the city, as well as in terms of public access, specific agreements and conditions in there around there's a certain limit on the number of games that we can play, right? Okay. We can no more than 20, right? About 5% of the year. Or when you look at the months from March to November when the season takes place, those nice, bright, warm weather months, folks were concerned about making sure we protect those weekends. We're talking about 20 of 114 Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, right? So about 17%, right, or so. So 4 out of 5 of them untouched completely. And even on those days, specific protections that are, again, codified into lease agreements that are available to the public for them to be able to see how we're thinking about the prioritization of scheduling, again, for the large-scale permit events that are already happening there, BPS events, and all of those different protections. They're making sure that they're included. One of my favorite is, there is a certain amount of games that we can schedule within a 2 to 4 week period. It cannot be more than 2 in a 4 week period. So ensuring that at least a majority of the weekends are still available and impacted by games, right? Because again, we heard that as like a key passionate outcry from folks across the spectrum on the project.
Yeah. So the rest of the park is still completely open all the time, even if there's a game, right? Like you can go walk through the park if the stadium is being used.
Yeah, we actually see our role as a positive contributing neighbor to a growing ecosystem that already exists at Franklin Park. We mentioned earlier about my relationship to the park, my ability to walk down there. I walk regularly with my wife and my newborn son, and It's fun, thank you, to go, whether we go to the Franklin Park Zoo, or I actually started recently getting into golf because I felt more culturally inclusive at pull-up at the golf course at Divine, and now to be able to have White Stadium think about another magnet or another community space for folks to be able to come to as they experience the rest of the magnitude of the park and all of the wonderful things that already happen there. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah. Does Legacy have any association with the other events that will happen there? And I don't mean the BPS things. I mean, like, will there be concerts? Will there be shows? Like, what other things will happen in the stadium, and are you affiliated with that at all?
So first, we're starting by thinking about our relationship about what already precedes us, right? What's already happening in the parks, and we've been intentional about making sure we reach out to and try to communicate consistently with the inhabitants of the park, and folks already in there and have space there. As I mentioned earlier, the zoo is one of my favorite activities there, and talking about what will our impact as neighbors be, and trying to think about that in concert with them, as well as thinking about, again, large-scale permit events and what that impact will be. We start by thinking about the consideration of the impact on those who have preceded us, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to be able to contribute by thinking of a comprehensive plan for transportation for all of these different moving pieces for folks that would benefit from that not existing currently, and then thinking about all of those pieces in concert with them.
I know a lot of folks continue to be annoyed with the financial side of it, so they feel like they shouldn't be contributing to a private team's stadium access. How would you respond to that?
I totally understand that. I think typically folks are wary of these kind of deals because they think that a city is putting up public tax dollars to subsidize a billionaire's toy thing. And to that point, I think that actually speaks to the appeal of this unique partnership, where it works in the reverse, where the team essentially is subsidizing the city's renovation of this.
Although one could argue the renovation would be much cheaper were they not making a FIFA-approved stadium. Right.
I think in some ways, one other part or another way of looking at this too is, and one of the things that drew me to this role in particular as I transitioned from the community member who was attending community meetings and had my perspective expanded, was hearing about the significant burden of maintenance as well, right? And I think one of the benefits I feel most proud of as a team is us taking on maintenance for the entirety of the city, which when you do the calculation, particularly as you look over this 30-year lease that we're thinking about, we're calculating about $2 million per year. Over 30 years is $60 million.
Yeah.
And that we're on the hook for. And that's a projection of $2 million now.
And that's going to go up.
That's probably right. Anyone who's rented or anyone who owns a home and is at HOA, if you think that's going down, imagine if I was able to tell you overall to, summarize the partnership, we should go 50-50 on a place. I'll cover 50% of the 50% of the cost, even though I will only be there for about 5 to 10% of the year. And I'll take on the HOA cost in perpetuity, regardless of whether that goes up or not.
Not a bad deal.
I think you probably would wonder what my motive would be, why I would take on a deal like that, especially if you retained 100% equity.
Right. And you have access to it a lot more.
I literally have contractually obligated only 20 days, no more than that, for soccer games. Right. And then additional practice, although we will make other investments in practice facilities as well. Okay. So we're talking, again, 5 to 10% of the year, you retain 100% equity and get me to cover 50% of the cost.
Yeah, that's a good, compelling argument. One other concern I wanted to ask you about is gentrification. So that area is already seeing some gentrification, particularly I think on the JP side of Franklin Park. Costs are really high. Housing costs are extremely high. Other surrounding areas are actually some of the more affordable parts of these neighborhoods. Are you concerned about, if this is a successful project, which we hope it will be, it could drive up costs across the board? How would you respond to that? Yeah,
I think I operate with the urgency for addressing the gentrification already happening. Right. And I think about that from the perspective as a homeowner who's on that affordable side in Roxbury in the Garrison Trotter neighborhood. I thought about it in my relationship, been contributing to it as someone who bought in 2019 and someone who has been in the area for these last 6 years since. Right. And I think that's been going on throughout the last 40 years of futility as it relates to the renovation of White Stadium, which prompts a question like, what are we doing about that? because that's going to happen and is happening regardless of whether or not this renovation happens. And I think this renovation provides an opportunity to at least tangibly respond to providing a solution for how we plan to employ folks from our community as a mechanism for their economic mobility to address that, right? Yeah. If these folks are part of these lifetime contracts, again, we're talking about that 30-year lease, we're talking about what that can do for sustained business across multiple entrepreneurships, across multiple households, addressing their ability to be able to stay in their home and to be able to address gentrification. That's a tangible solution that I can provide to this conversation, and I welcome others.
Yeah. I think gentrification is often misused as a term. Progress and development doesn't necessarily equal gentrification, but it's a very easy boogeyman.
Agree.
I think it's used to justify NIMBYism at times, which it's a whole different podcast.
Happy to have that conversation too. It's important one.
I want to talk about the high school students. So they're getting some pretty world-class facilities out of this. And they're getting some role models, which is really cool because women's sports are starting to be more visible in the U.S.
Yes, absolutely.
Women's basketball is really exploding with some of these great stars who have emerged. And women's soccer has been a force in U.S. for a long time. I mean, I'm from Rochester. Abby Wambach was a Rochesterian. Mia Hamm has been on the scene for ages, right?
Yep.
So talk about how you guys see the influence of your club on these students, especially high school girls, and how you think they're going to benefit from these facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about that role model piece, I think we think about that in, again, very tangible terms versus some esoteric notion that you just happen to see people. And obviously there's power in representation, but I think very tangibly for us, one of the biggest benefits of this partnership is that direct relationship where we are investing in their development and doing so in a number of different ways, including paid internships, scholarships, and top-tier training spaces, right? So there is that sense of self and self-advocacy, right, around like I can actually achieve athletically and maybe have a career like an Olympian, like you just mentioned, because I'm literally in the same facility and accessing the same resources that they are, as well as other development pathways for thinking about their careers outside of sports as well, or within sports, and providing very tangible pathways for them. I think that relationship is what we mean when we talk about our impact 365 days a year, right? That obviously is for the students who will enjoy the tripled programming, as well as increased in improvement in their facilities for their training, but also the direct relationship with the pro sports. And as we know in the city, folks are pretty passionate when it comes to their sports, both for BPS as well as pro sports.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to touch base with you on is timing. So it seems like there's been some delays on the construction. Correct me if I'm wrong, you guys have a deadline sent down from FIFA, right? Or from NWSL that you have to have a stadium ready by the end of, by spring of next year? What is your deadline?
So our timeline still remains with the slight adjustments you mentioned. We had originally planned to play in spring 2026.
Okay.
Like as you correctly mentioned, the construction has been delayed, and we will play at Gillette for our inaugural season 2026, and then we were aiming to be ready for the spring 2027 at White Stadium.
What was the delay?
The delay, construction.
But nothing unforeseen. Just.
No, I think this was taken into consideration from the beginning, and anyone who's ever done any construction, whether it's a small home rebuild or something to this significant magnitude and scale, can understand that timelines adjust.
Got it. Okay, so we'll see the legacy coming in to White Stadium in 2027.
Yep.
And the season starts in March, you said?
Yes.
Awesome. Very cool. You're from Chicago.
Born and raised in the north side of Chicago.
Are you a fan of The Bear?
Yes, actually, I just started rewatching season 3. I should say rewatching. Started resuming watching because I'd fallen off after the end of season 2, and I'm 2 seasons behind. But yes,
because it just dropped. Season 4 dropped.
Exactly.
I think
that's probably
Tuesday.
why it was on top of mind, because it was promoted to me.
I'm very excited that the new season is out. I need to pace myself though, because I tend to binge them.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm doing.
And I've got a year, so I need to make it last at least a month.
2 seasons behind. So in the same train with
you. Got some time. Yeah. Well, speaking of food, you're a local guy now. where do you find yourself eating in Dorchester?
Yeah, I find myself eating at a few different places. So again, Roxbury, I have to use this opportunity to shout Suya Joint for a number of different reasons. They played a key role in bringing me home and making Roxbury and Dorchester feel like home and feel like Chicago. And they're especially top of mind right now in this moment. I'm a huge fan of Just Thai in Fields Corner. I love Thai food on a day like today where it's gloomy. And I'm just saying the entire outline of Dorchester Ave all the way up for on a day like today. I'm feeling kind of inspired. So I would say those are probably the few spots that come to mind immediately. Awesome. And then also Bread Gourmet. If we were going to count Laura Mills, again, we could have the debate around. I would say that's Dorchester.
That's Dorchester.
Yeah, I agree.
For sure. Oh, he's a Laura Mills boy. He's mad at you now. Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming and having this conversation. And I'll see you at a Legacy game.
Yeah, great to hear. Thank you.
Thanks so much.